Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's nice to give such a warm welcome, and can I wish all members a Happy New Year, as well as all members of staff in the House. And I hope the whole House will join me, and I'm sure they will, Mr. Speaker, in paying tribute to 22-year-old Lance Corporal Scott Hetherington, who died in a non-combat incident in Iraq last Monday. And I'm sure the whole House will join in heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of the tragic death of 7-year-old Katie Ruff in York earlier this week. I think it's right that we send condolences to her family. Last week, Mr. Speaker, 485 people in England spent more than 12 hours on trolleys in hospital corridors. The Red Cross described this as a humanitarian crisis. I called on the Prime Minister to come to Parliament on Monday. She didn't. She sent the Health Secretary. But does she agree with him that the best way to solve the crisis of the 4-hour wait is to fiddle the figures so that people are not seen to be waiting so long on trolleys in NHS hospitals?
Well, first of all, may I join the Right Honourable Gentleman in sending our condolences to the family of Lance Corporal Hetherington, who, as he said, died in a non-combat incident in Iraq. From everything I have seen and read about Lance Corporal Hetherington, he was a very fine young man. He was delighted in being in the armed forces, and we're proud that such a fine young man was in our armed forces. I also join the Right Honourable Gentleman in expressing condolences to the family and friends of little Katie, who died so tragically. Now, he talks about the pressures on the NHS, and we acknowledge that there are pressures on the National Health Service. There are always extra pressures on the NHS during the winter, but of course we have at the moment those added pressures of the ageing population and the growing complex needs of the population. He also refers to the British Red Cross's term of a humanitarian crisis. I have to say to him that I think we've all seen humanitarian crises around the world, and to use that description of a National Health Service which last year saw 2.5 million more people treated in accident and emergency than 6 years ago, was irresponsible and overblown.
Mr. Speaker, 1.8 million people had to wait longer than 4 hours last year in A&E departments. Now, the Prime Minister might not like what the Red Cross said, but on the same day, the British Medical Association said conditions in hospitals across the country are reaching a dangerous level. The Royal College of Nursing has said NHS conditions the worst ever. Royal College of Physicians has told the Prime Minister the NHS is underfunded, underdoctored and overstretched. If she won't listen to the Red Cross, who will she listen to?
I've said to the Right Honourable Gentleman that I of course acknowledge that there are pressures on the National Health Service. The government has put extra funding into the National Health Service. The fact that we are seeing more people being treated in our NHS, 2,500 more people are treated within 4 hours every day in the National Health Service. That's because of the government putting in extra funding and of the hard work of medical professionals in our National Health Service. But I also say to him, it's not just a question of targets in relation to the health service, and we continue to have a commitment, as the Health Secretary has made clear, to the 4-hour target. It is a question of making sure that people are provided with the appropriate care for them and the best possible care for them in their circumstances.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, she seems to be in some degree of denial about this and won't listen to professional organisations who've spent their whole lifetime doing their best for the NHS. But can I ask her if she'll listen to Sian, who works for the NHS? She has a 22-month-old nephew. He went into hospital. There was no bed. He was treated on 2 plastic chairs pushed together with a blanket. And she says one of the nurses told her sister, it's always like this nowadays, and she asked a question to all of us. Surely we should strive to do better than this. Does the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary think this is an acceptable way of treating a 22-month-old child needing help?
Shameful.
I accept there have been a small number of incidents where where unacceptable practices have taken place. But what matters What matters, we don't want those things to happen. What matters is how you then deal with them. And that's why it's so important that the NHS does look into issues where there are unacceptable incidents that have taken place and then learns lessons from them. But I come back to the point that I was making earlier. He talks about the hard-working healthcare professionals like Sian in the National Health Service, and indeed we should be grateful for the work, all those who are working in the NHS. Over the Christmas period, in the Tuesday after Christmas, we saw the busiest day ever in the National Health Service. And over the few weeks around Christmas, we saw the day when more people were treated in accident and emergency within 4 hours than had ever happened before. This is the reality of our National Health Service.
Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, we all thank the NHS staff and we all praise the NHS staff. But her government is proposing through sustainability and transformation to cut 1/3 of the beds in all of our hospitals in the very near future. And on Monday she spoke about mental health and doing more to help people, particularly young people, with those conditions. And I welcome that, except that last night the BBC revealed that over 5 years there'd been an 89% increase in young people with mental health issues having to go to A&E departments. So doesn't she agree that the £1.25 billion committed to child and adolescent mental health in 2015 should have been ring-fenced rather than used as a resource to be raided to plug other holes in other budgets within the NHS?
If we look at what is happening in relation to mental health treatment in the National Health Service, we see 1,400 more people every day accessing mental health services. Now, when I spoke about this issue on Monday, I said that there is, of course, more for us to do. This is not a problem that is going to be resolved overnight. I have set out ways in which we are going to see an improvement in the services in relation to mental health. But it is about the appropriate care for any individual. And as I mentioned earlier, that's not just about accident and emergency. When I was in Aldershot on Monday, I spoke to service users with mental health problems who said they didn't want to go to accident and emergency. The provision of alternative services has meant that the A&E locally has seen their numbers stabilising rather than going up. It's about the appropriate care for the individual. We want to see that good practice spread across the whole country.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, nobody wants people with mental health conditions to go to A&E departments. The A&E departments don't want them to go there. But under this government, there's 6,000 fewer nurses working in mental health, 400 fewer doctors working in mental health. It's obvious they're going to go somewhere to try and get help when they're in a desperate situation. Mr. Speaker, our NHS is under huge pressure. Much of that is caused by cuts to social care. The Royal College of Physicians says that it is pushing more people into our hospitals and trapping them there for longer. So will the Prime Minister do what my friend, the member for Leicester South, has called for and bring forward the extra £700 million allocated in 2019 now into social care so that we don't have this problem of people staying too long in hospital when they should be cared for by a social care system?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman asked me these questions before Christmas in the last PM Qs. He may find it difficult to believe that somebody will say the same thing that they said a few weeks ago, but we have put extra money into social care. In the medium term, we are ensuring that best practice is spread across the country, because he talks about delayed discharges. There are some local authorities working with their health service locally where there are virtually no delayed discharges. 50%, half of the delayed discharges are in only 24 local authority areas. What does that tell us? It tells us it's not just about funding, it's about best practice. But if the Right Honourable Gentleman comes back to me and talks to me about funding again, he should think on this. We can only fund social care and we can only fund the NHS if we have a strong economy. We'll only have that with the Conservatives.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to have to bring the Prime Minister back to the subject of social care, which I raised before Christmas. The reason I did so, and I will continue to do so, is she hasn't addressed the problem. The government has cut £4.6 billion from social care budget.
Yep. Yes.
The King's Fund says there is a social care funding gap of £2 billion almost this year. Earlier this week, the Prime Minister said she wanted to create a shared society. Well, we've certainly got that. More people sharing hospital corridors on trolleys. More people sharing waiting areas at A&E departments. More people sharing in anxiety created by this government. Our NHS, Mr. Speaker, is in crisis, but the Prime Minister is in denial. Can I suggest to her, on the economic question, cancel the corporate tax cuts. Spend the money where it's needed on people in desperate need in social care or in our hospitals.
The right honourable gentleman talks about crisis. I suggest he listens to the honourable member for Don Valley, a former Labour health minister, who said the following: "With Labour, it's always about crisis. The NHS is on its knees. We've got to be a bit more grown up about this." And he talks to me about corporation tax and restoring the cuts in corporation tax. The Labour Party has already spent that money 8 times. The last thing the NHS needs is a cheque from Labour that bounces. The only way that we can ensure we've got funding for the National Health Service is a strong economy. Yesterday, the right honourable gentleman proved that he's not only incompetent, but that he would destroy our economy, and that would devastate our National Health Service.